Hi everyone, welcome back. Today is part 2 of my very basic introduction to software as a service, SaaS. And also give a very brief intro to the analogous data as a service. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, which is episode 11, I encourage you to do that first. Thanks. Now, a common form of SaaS deployment model nowadays is access to the application through a web browser, where the browser is basically analogous to the terminal of the time-sharing era. To access the application business logic, which is sitting on servers in one or more data centers. Now, one difference here from the old days, in addition to these applications being a lot more powerful, is that the server side is now made up usually of lots of small but powerful servers, rather than a huge single mainframe, with the ability to distribute load across all those servers dynamically. But the core idea is the same. The end user doesn't need to install or manage the application because the software vendor is managing it for them. That's the idea of it being as a service. This idea that the application and the computing resources needed to run it are somewhere else, where the end user or the customer administrator doesn't need to worry about or even know about them. That's where the term the cloud came from. Before the idea of cloud computing was formalized, people would routinely refer to hands-off server resources as sitting in the cloud, which simply meant they could be anywhere. Don't worry about it. The word cloud was used to convey the sort of ethereal experience of not needing to know or worry about the servers. But that term cloud has now become formalized and more widely recognized with the rise of big infrastructure as a service, platform as a service providers, such as Google Cloud Platform. Now, as I said, one form of SaaS deployment is via web browser. Google Workspace is a wonderful example of software that is accessed via a web browser. At one of my own startup companies many years ago, Droplets, developed some core innovations back in the late 1990s of lightweight, component-level, asynchronous, real-time communication between a generic client and application code running on a server that allowed the web to evolve from being basically a document viewing and hyperlinking platform to being a platform that can support rich, highly interactive applications like we're used to. Now, web browser applications feel super easy to access, in part because the browser is a standard front end that can support any web-based applications, in theory, and because it generally, though not always, comes pre-installed on the computer or mobile device. But it's important to remember that the web browser is still a client-side application that needs to be installed and maintained by someone, and it still plays the role of the terminal in application delivery. Now, not all SaaS applications are reliant on the browser. Many, for example, Slack or Evernote, have dedicated desktop apps to display their user interfaces. The guts of the application and the user data largely stays on the vendor-managed servers, but these apps do have their own specific client that is mostly about displaying the user interface of the application, perhaps enabling some performance advantages, and maybe having some level of offline capability for when there's no network connection. Now, many mobile applications today still operate in the desktop computing paradigm, where end users download individual apps, probably from an app store, which they run just for themselves on their phones and tablets, which may be entirely self-contained on the mobile device, or may have some or most of their business logic and data sitting in the cloud somewhere and have only a client-side piece to display the front end. Now, data as a service, DaaS, is analogous to SaaS, but for data instead of applications. Instead of buying a set of data that is delivered to you and which you load and manage on your own computers, DaaS lets you subscribe to access to a data set that sits on the vendor server somewhere in the cloud. Again, you don't need to know or care where. In general, data is either delivered as a stream of updates, which may be as infrequently as like once a month or as fast as thousands of times per second, or it may be historical data, meaning it's a block of data that's no longer changing, that's basically become static. Now, it's pretty easy to imagine why data as a service makes sense for streaming updates, but it can also be used for historical data, where the ability to run queries against a data set is sold and accessed as a subscription service without the customer needing to store or manage that data separately on their own. Some DaaS providers, such as another one of my startups, Crux, also serve an important role of unifying and making data operations consistent across multiple data sets from different sources. So it's easy to access lots of data that might be quite different behind the scenes. Thanks, everyone. That's my thought for now. I'll be back again soon with more. Take care.